Okay, so look, I never thought I'd be the kind of girl to do this. Like, cheating. It's gross, right? But then I met Mike. He started at the office maybe 6 months ago, fresh out of college. I don't know, he just had this way about him. Easy laugh, you know? At first, it was just lunches together, catching up after meetings. But then we started going for coffee after work, just to talk. Nothing big, we'd talk about life, stupid stuff. It was nice, having someone who wasn't Jim. Don't get me wrong, Jim's great. He's sweet, he's stable, loves the crap out of me. But Mike was exciting. Different. I started thinking about him way too much, waiting for those coffees, wishing he'd text me after work. I'd make excuses to stop by his desk, just to say hi. It felt harmless, like a little flirting, no big deal. I know it was wrong. I knew it the whole time. But I liked feeling wanted, feeling that spark. Jim. Sometimes it felt like we were going through the motions, you know? Like, I didn't feel like a hot girlfriend anymore, just a comfortable wife. Maybe it was stupid, a midlife crisis or something. I convinced myself I just needed a little excitement, that it didn't mean anything. One afternoon, Mike walked me to my car after work. He said something funny, and I laughed, threw my head back. When I looked at him again, there was this glint in his eye. Before I even knew it was happening, he kissed me. And I kissed him back. It was like a switch flipped. Everything changed after that. The sneaky lunches turned into full-on dates. Lies became my second language. At night, I'd lie in bed next to Jim, heart pounding, thinking of Mike. The guilt would eat at me, but then I'd remember how Mike looked at me, how he made me feel alive. I thought I could hide it, compartmentalize. They always say that in those dumb movies, right? But you can't. You can't split yourself in two no matter how hard you try. That kiss changed everything, ruined everything, more like. But at that moment, I couldn't get enough. We started finding dumb reasons to stay late. Oh hey, Mike, can you help me with this spreadsheet? Even though I could have done it myself in like 5 minutes. It got so bad that even Jim noticed, giving me those sad, puppy dog eyes. You working late again, hun? He'd try to be all casual about it, but I could tell he was hurting. That just made me feel even worse. He'd come up behind me at my desk, try to massage my shoulders, and I'd tense up, swatting his hands away. Every time Jim kissed me goodnight, touched my hair, I swear, a little piece of me died inside. I still loved him, I did, but it wasn't the same anymore. His kisses felt boring. The way he looked at me, so safe and comfortable, just made me think of all the adventure I was missing with Mike. I told myself it was temporary, a weird phase. That Mike and I would eventually get it out our systems and I'd go back to normal. Just a little harmless fun, I'd try to convince myself. But the fun wasn't so harmless anymore. It was starting to take over everything. One night, Jim had one of his buddies over for beers, watching a game. I made up this whole lie about needing to run a late errand, but really, I went to meet Mike at this bar across town. We drank, laughed, and then we drove out to some lookout point, all those cheesy stars in the sky. We didn't talk much, just kissed. And kissed. And kissed. The next morning, that sickening feeling hit me hard. Jim made me pancakes, my favorite. He tried to be all cheerful, and I just wanted to sink through the floor. The look in his eyes, still trusting, still loving, it nearly broke me. Afterward, driving home, I threw up on the side of the road. I wasn't even drunk, just sick to my stomach. See, that was the thing no one tells you about cheating. It doesn't make you feel good. It makes you feel dirty, a twisted version of yourself. It makes you the person you swore you'd never be. I kept thinking, this isn't me. This can't be me. But, there I was, driving home, reeking of vomit and another man's cologne, about to lie right to my husband's face again. After that night with Mike at the lookout, looking at Jim became physically painful. Like, my chest would actually hurt whenever I tried to be nice to him. The guilt and this new excitement with Mike. They were warring inside me, twisting me up from the inside out. The thing about a secret like this, it starts to color everything you see. Jim's goofy sense of humor, the way I used to find endearing, suddenly grated on my nerves. That way he chewed his cereal was suddenly gross. How had I never noticed this stuff before? I'd snap at him for the dumbest little things, then try to cover it with a fake laugh like, geez, babe, can't you take a joke? He'd look at me with those confused eyes, like he was trying to figure out who this stranger was, the stranger replacing his wife. I couldn't get Mike out of my head. Every little thing was a reminder. That stupid smirk when he made a good point in a meeting. The way he tossed his hair when it fell over his forehead. It was all I could think about. I'd wake up in the middle of the night sweating, my heart pounding, thinking Mike's name instead of Jim's. I was turning into some kind of a cliché, living out a bad romance novel, the kind I used to scoff at. One evening, we were watching TV after dinner, some stupid sitcom I'd watched a million times with Jim. The main character made some cheesy joke, something about marriage being like prison. I laughed out loud, too loud, a brittle kind of laugh that echoed strangely in the room. I looked over, and Jim wasn't smiling. He just asked quietly, "Do you feel that way, honey? Does it feel like that to you?" I froze. I wanted to yell at him, tell him he was being paranoid, but that would have been a lie. The truth was, half of me did feel that way. That safe, comfortable life with Jim, it wasn't enough anymore. It felt constricting, suffocating. But worse than that, I felt this deep shame. How could I, someone who'd always prided herself on honesty and loyalty, do this to someone who only ever loved me? All I could do was look away, mumbling some lame excuse about being tired. I felt like a coward, like the lowest kind of person. Yet, even as those thoughts ran through my head, images of Mike would flicker through my mind, promises of escape from this crushing guilt that felt too heavy to bear. The second I got to work, I'd be checking my phone like a crack addict, waiting for Mike's messages. It started innocently enough, dumb jokes, work gossip. But those texts became my obsession, the highlight of my day. At night, lying next to Jim, I'd pretend to be asleep and text Mike under the covers, the phone's glow illuminating this stupid grin on my face. It was like all the joy and excitement had been sucked out of my marriage and injected straight into this little phone. And yeah, I knew it was messed up. But, the more I texted Mike, the easier it was to ignore how messed up it really was. I'd tell myself, we're just friends. He's the only one who truly gets me. It's totally harmless. It was the lie I needed to tell myself to keep going, to keep smiling at Jim while my mind was somewhere totally different. Sometimes we'd text about work, but mostly, it was our lives. He'd complain about his tiny apartment, I'd vent about Jim leaving his socks on the floor. Again. We'd talk about dreams, the kind of stuff I used to talk about only with Jim. But with Mike, it felt better. No judgment. Just this giddy feeling that he had my back no matter what, even if, what, was my messed up double life. One night, Jim had this work dinner he had to go to. Before he left, he kissed me goodbye, and I swear it felt like nothing. Just lips brushing my cheek and the vague smell of his aftershave. But all I could think about was sneaking into the bathroom right after he left, firing off a text to Mike. "My whole life is a lie," I wrote. Half joking, but half dead serious. His reply came almost instantly, "Bad day." That was it, those 2 words. The crack in my reality suddenly felt like a gaping canyon. I remember looking at myself in the mirror, and it was like a stranger was staring back at me. Mascara smudged, eyes tired and sad, and the stupid, pathetic smile I'd plastered on my face for Jim, it was disgusting. I sat there on the bathroom floor for I don't know how long, just texting Mike like he was my lifeline. And in that moment, I guess he kinda was. The only thing keeping me from sinking into that cold, hard truth. I was cheating on my husband and becoming someone I hated. The thing with secrets, they have a way of taking on a life of their own. One minute it's stolen glances and flirtatious texts, the next you're living on borrowed time. Maybe I was fooling myself into thinking I could control this, play this dangerous game with fire and not get burned. But that afternoon in the office parking lot shattered that twisted little fantasy. We were both working late, like usual. I was about to leave when Mike stopped by my desk, asking for help with a file. His eyes, that same glint, only this time there was a hunger in them I hadn't noticed before. Outside, it was drizzling, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt. I fumbled with my keychain, trying to sound casual. "Can't this wait till tomorrow?" He barely answered, just a nod. But then his hand was on mine, stopping me from opening my car door. It was like all the air got sucked out of the world, my heart beating so loud I couldn't hear anything else. "I don't think this is just about work anymore," he said, voice low and husky. It wasn't a question. In that moment, time didn't exist. Maybe I should have pulled away, told him to stop, said it was a mistake. But the truth is, I wanted it. Maybe this was who I really was, someone weak and reckless. The kiss wasn't soft or romantic. It was desperate, messy, and everything I knew was wrong. Afterward, driving home, I felt not good, but not exactly bad either. Alive. Like that dull ache inside me had been replaced by this throbbing, dangerous energy. I knew this had gone too far. We both knew. But the thrill, that feeling that nothing mattered but that moment, well, it was addicting. From that day on, my life became about sneaking around. Staying late for fake meetings, deleting texts from Mike, lying to Jim about where I'd been. It was exhausting, but it was easier than facing the truth. I'd become some cliché movie villain, only instead of bank robberies, my crime was destroying the heart of the man who loved me the most. The worst part wasn't lying to Jim, it was the way he started looking at me. Not angry, just confused. Like he was trying to make sense of this woman he was married to, the woman he thought he knew inside out, and just not getting the answers. He tried so hard. He'd come home with flowers, or my favorite takeout, little gestures that used to make my heart melt. Now, they just made me feel sick. The guilt was a monster now, gnawing at my insides every time he smiled at me, or said, "I love you," with that innocent, trusting look in his eyes. I tried to hide it, faked the old affection. But there was this coldness now, like a wall between us. One night, we were watching some stupid rom-com, and he leaned over and tried to kiss me. I flinched, turned away, pretended to cough, anything to avoid him. Later, in bed, he cuddled up behind me like always. But his touch felt heavy, alien almost. All I could think about was how just a few hours earlier, Mike's hands had been on my skin, his scent still clinging to me. It was revolting. The craziest part? After feeling this sick disgust for my own husband, I'd run into Mike's arms. We'd meet up like addicts, frantic and desperate. I needed that rush, that escape from the monster I'd become. He couldn't see what I saw in the mirror. The liar, the cheater, the coward. One morning, I woke up with this crushing weight on my chest. Jim was already up, in the kitchen making coffee like nothing was wrong. I snuck into the bathroom, shut the door, and just stared at my reflection. My face was blotchy, like I'd been crying non-stop. But the tears wouldn't come. Just that emptiness, that hollowness, the knowledge that I was destroying everything good my life had built on, and I was just too weak to stop it. I started to fall apart, bit by bit. Insomnia became my best friend. I'd lie in bed for hours, mind racing, replaying the lies I'd told Jim, the stolen moments with Mike. Some nights, I'd cry until I had nothing left. Other nights my body seemed to shut down completely, numb and empty. My appetite was a mess. Some days I couldn't eat a thing, sick to my stomach with guilt and anxiety. Others, I'd binge on junk, desperate to fill the gnawing emptiness inside. And always, the panic attacks. It started in the car. Driving to work my heart would pound, sweat pooling in my palms until I thought I might faint right there on the highway. The worst was trying to act normal around Jim. That forced cheerfulness, that pretend smile. I could see it reflected in his eyes, how unconvincing it all was. My once bright, easygoing personality? Gone. Replaced by this tense, hollow version of myself. One morning, Jim found me huddled on the bathroom floor, racked with sobs. He looked so scared, helpless. He knelt beside me, held me as I cried, muttering apologies I didn't even understand. "Let's get away," he whispered later. His voice was hopeful, almost desperate. "A little beach vacation, just us. Remember that place we went on our honeymoon? Reconnect, clear our heads." My heart sank. A getaway? Trapped on an island with the two warring sides of my conscience? It felt like the ultimate punishment. But then, a flicker of twisted hope. Maybe this was it, my chance to choose. To leave Mike behind, focus on repairing what I'd broken with Jim. Part of me, some small, buried part, knew that's what I should want. To be the wife I was supposed to be. But even as I agreed, as Jim's face lit up with relief, all I could think was, if I leave, I'll never see Mike again. And somewhere deep, deep down, the truth I desperately tried to hide, I didn't want to. The whole point of that trip was supposed to be peace. To find some clarity, make the right decision, fix things with Jim. But that first morning, waking up alone to the sound of crashing waves, all I felt was this crushing dread. I spent the days wandering the beach, feet sinking into the sand, mind a whirlwind. Jim and Mike, like two blurry figures wrestling in my brain. I'd try to imagine a future with Jim, cozy dinners, maybe a family, that comfortable life I'd once dreamed of. But it was like trying to grasp at smoke, the image dissolved before I could get a hold of it. Then I'd picture Mike. Fire, excitement, the way he made me feel young and reckless. And so deeply, dangerously alive. There was an intensity with him I'd never known before, an intensity I craved like a drug, even knowing this whole thing was poison. You love them both. The thought surfaced one afternoon, clear as the blue sky above me. It wasn't confusing, wasn't a shock. It was just true. And the worst part, I didn't know if that was even possible. Love was supposed to be about one person, right? By the time the trip ended, I was more of a mess than when it started. I went back home, and that horrible game continued as if I'd never left. Lying to Jim's face, sneaking around with Mike. The shame of it all made me sick, but I still couldn't stop. Jim was trying so hard. He planned romantic dinners, surprised me with little gifts, asked what was wrong, how he could help. His kindness only made it all worse. I couldn't bring myself to confess, to see the heartbreak in his eyes. I was a coward, the worst kind. One night, he held me close, whispered, "Just tell me what you want, honey. I'll do anything." I choked back a sob. The thing was, I knew exactly what I wanted, the impossible. 2 men, 2 lives. A love divided, and that division was destroying me. It was always going to end badly. Anyone with a shred of sense could see that. Yet, I'd clung to this pathetic little fantasy that I could control it, keep my 2 lives neat and separate. Of course, I was dead wrong. It began with a text message. Not from Mike, from Jim. Usually, I was obsessively careful deleting messages, clearing my browser history. But that afternoon, I'd rushed off to meet Mike for some stolen lunch hour, leaving my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. I didn't see the notification pop up, the little buzz that sealed my fate. Jim was home early that day. Something about a cancelled meeting. Lucky break, he'd said with that hopeful smile, the one that used to melt my heart and now filled me with dread. I was on the back porch, sneaking a cigarette, another dirty little secret fueled by all this stress, when I heard the crash. That sickening sound of porcelain shattering against tile. At first, I couldn't place it, then my blood ran cold. My phone. I found him in the kitchen, kneeling amongst the shards of my favorite mug. He wasn't looking at the mess, just at the phone screen clutched in his shaking hand. The text from Mike was right there, incriminatingly innocent. "Can't wait for tonight," winking face. I wanted to scream, to lie, to say anything that would wipe that look from his face. But the words died in my throat. His face crumpled. The hurt, the shock, it wasn't rage, just this agonizing bewilderment. Like he'd been punched in the gut, and was just trying to catch his breath. "Please," he finally croaked out, "tell me it's not what I think." But all I could do was look away, shame washing over me in a hot, sickening wave. I knew what I'd done. I knew what I was. And I knew there were no more lies, no more excuses, no way to fix this. In that moment, the world I'd built over 5 years with Jim, every shared dream and tender memory, just imploded. After Jim found the text, everything was a blur. Words were exchanged, but I barely registered them. His raw pain, choked accusations, my mumbled apologies, they all blended into this awful, deafening roar in my ears. Through it all, one sentence cut through: "I want you to leave." His voice was cold, hard, unfamiliar. I didn't cry, didn't argue. Somewhere inside, I think I knew I deserved this. A small, numb part of me just went through the motions, packing a suitcase, avoiding Jim's gaze, fumbling for my keys in a haze. As I drove away, the tears finally started. Big, gasping sobs that made it hard to breathe. But it wasn't just for Jim, or the life I'd ruined. It was for myself, for the woman I now saw reflected in the rearview mirror, weak, selfish, a stranger to herself. That night, I ended up on Mike's doorstep, suitcase in hand, mascara streaked down my face. His eyes went wide with surprise, then a smirk spread across his face. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, a touch of smugness in his voice. He took me in, of course. At first, there was a warped sense of relief, like finally washing ashore after a shipwreck. No more lies, no more balancing act. And I convinced myself this was what I wanted: Mike, the excitement, this new reckless life. But even as Mike held me that night, whispering promises of a fresh start, I couldn't escape it. The image of Jim's face as I left, that utter devastation. The knowledge that I'd broken the heart of the best man I'd ever known. The next morning, I woke up in Mike's sterile, unfamiliar apartment. It wasn't home, not anymore. The excitement had fizzled out overnight, replaced by this cold, creeping realization. I'd traded one kind of health